Hello all and welcome to RiskOut's webinar, BSA AML Decoded, Investigations and Case Management. We are so excited that you're joining us here today. Now, before we dive into today's webinar content, let's roll through some quick housekeeping items. RiskOut will be sharing all of today's webinar resources, including a download of the slides, the handouts in the handout section, and a recording of today's session in a follow-up email today. So please keep an eye on your inbox. We also want this session to be as valuable for you as possible. So we encourage you to ask any questions that you may have throughout today's session in the questions section of the webinar panel on the side of your screen. We will also be running a few polls throughout the webinar to better understand our audience, and your participation is greatly appreciated. Now, you might be wondering, who is RiskOut? Well, RiskOut is a team of former bank examiners, BSA professionals, and fintech developers helping financial institutions grow and be more efficient and profitable. Through a full BSA AML suite and specialized market tools, RiskOut's solution increases revenue and decreases your compliance burden by unlocking new deposit streams and automating compliance workflows. We're funded and influenced by over 200 financial institutions through networks like Castle Creek Launchpad, the Bankers Helping Bankers Fund, and Alloy Labs, and we're proud that 100% of our customers are referenceable. If you're interested in learning more, visit riskout.com and get in touch. Now, in case you missed it, this month, RiskOut announced a brand new comprehensive BSA AML solution. Our team has been working tirelessly to develop innovative and intuitive ways to solve common industry challenges in the realms of risk scoring, transaction monitoring, onboarding and due diligence, SAR and CTR filing, case and investigation management, and more. And I am thrilled that we are officially ready to share this solution with community banks and credit unions. If you would like to join us in taking the BS out of BSA, you can request a demo at riskout.com, or feel free to drop a note in the chat box today, or you can always answer the question in the follow-up survey after this webinar. We hope you're just as excited as we are. Now, today's webinar is going to be led by Kristin Parker, RiskOut's Vice President of Compliance and Operations, and Nina Hughes, a Senior Customer Success Manager here at RiskOut. Kristin has worked on both fraud and BSA teams, excuse me, where she successfully created and implemented BSA monitoring programs at community financial institutions for varying higher risk industries like hemp, MSBs, ATMs, cannabis, and more. Last year, she was also selected as PBC's Compliance Person of the Year by a group of her peers. Nina has excelled in financial crimes investigations since 2014, specializing in fraud prevention, BSA AML compliance, and consumer protection within the cannabis sector. In her role at RiskOut, Nina helps customers skillfully navigate complex regulatory landscapes and develop effective compliance strategies. We are so excited and honored to have them both taking time out to join us today. And without further ado, I will go ahead and pass it over to Kristin to dive into today's content. Take it away, Kristin.
Thank you, Ethan. Hey, Nina.
Hi everybody.
I thought it would be good for us to kind of walk through what we're going to talk through today. It's all about cases as investigation. And if you've been on past webinars with me, you know how passionate I am about, like, that's the end game, right? We need to be able to properly detect suspicious activity, investigate it, and then report it to law enforcement. Because at the end of the day, that's why we're here. We want to be able to catch the bad actors, get them to law enforcement, get the information to law enforcement, and put it in their hands. So today we're going to talk about really the background of what cases of investigation are, kind of lay the groundwork there. We're going to talk about challenges and limitations in cases and investigations in general, just from our own life experiences, working with institutions all over the United States, what they've run into, what they've told us, and what we've really deduced at how folks can better solve the issues in that space. And we're going to talk about the juicy stuff with some real life examples of cases and successful investigations, and then we'll just walk around with some key takeaways and Q&A at the end, but Q&A is not just for the end. If you want to ask questions at any point, feel free to ping us. We're happy to be interrupted and chat through.
Excellent. All right. Thank you for that high-level overview. That does bring us to our first poll question. As we dive in, we would love to know a little bit about who all we have on the call. So y'all should see this question pop up on your screen, and that asks, how are you currently handling cases and investigations at your financial institution? Just 3 pretty simple answers here. That is manually. Maybe you're doing these in Excel, maybe pen and paper. Maybe you're using a management software solution, or your third option there, maybe you're using a combination of both. Maybe that software solution isn't fully cutting it, so you're kind of piecing it together, some Excel, some software. Would love to get a feel for where we're at today. We'll give y'all just a couple more seconds to get these responses in. Looks like we've already got a good amount. So let's see who all we've got joining us today. As you can see on your screen, we actually have a dead tie for first place here. So 44% of our audience today is using management software, and another 44% are using a combination of software and manual techniques, with only about 13% actually using only manual solutions. Kristin, I'm curious, how does this stack up to what you're expecting or what you typically see with risk out customers?
Yeah, we see quite the combination of what folks are doing. Usually when folks get started with risk out, it's because either they have existing software or they have a manual program. Risk out is really designed to help these institutions kind of put pieces of the puzzle together to help better streamline their processes. And so we see the mix of people already having existing software that just need additional tools to kind of help close the gaps of what they're seeing and having to do manually. We see a lot of manual that are looking to, maybe grow or just kind of streamline the processes that they're doing manually. Manually is, more, I've got mad respect for people doing it manually because a lot of times they have gone through the ringer of either never having the ability to afford software or be afforded that budget to have a software, or maybe they've used software in the past that just doesn't fit their needs because their institution is unique or too small for some of these other guys. So it's quite the combination. I have a lot of respect for anybody who's doing anything in this space. This is not an easy task to do, sometimes with certain softwares and sometimes, manually as well. Nina?
Yeah, absolutely. Hats off to the folks that are doing it manually. I don't know. I feel like manually you get to see the process from A to Z versus watching software kind of like help you along. So my hat definitely goes off to those folks that are doing it manually. For those of you guys that are have a software to help, kudos to you. Yeah.
Excellent, y'all. Well, thank you so much for participating in that poll question. Like I mentioned, we'll have a couple more throughout the session, so we'll keep you on your toes. With that, I'll go ahead and send it into the background section.
All right. So why do we even care about investigations and cases? Well, really, your job is to be able to detect and report suspicious activity. If you just deduce it and boil it down to what it is you've got to be able to try to find the bad guys, keep them out of your institution, tell on the folks that are, and if there's not a process that you have in your institution to really do and conduct cases and thoroughly investigate things well, then you are probably wanting to pull your hair out in this space, because it is some of the biggest scrutiny that happens at an institution during their safety and soundness exam is all around the investigation and processes piece. So when we talk in detail about this area, we often talk about what's the roadmap to get from, okay, that maybe this is an alert, or if you don't have a BSA AML system, so you don't have an alert, maybe you have a work list because some institutions use softwares that just produce lists every month for people to look at, and then some manually are just kind of looking through reports that were built in-house. Okay, what's the roadmap to saying, okay, I think this is suspicious, to it going into an investigation and then going into a case and then ultimately having a no SAR or SAR filing. This is really the investigation cases piece is really kind of the final piece of the puzzle as to whether or not what your next actions are. Common cases include, anything that's coming through an alert that you might detect. Something might not pass the sniff test initially when you look at that alert. Doesn't mean that since you've escalated it into a case that you're actually gonna have to file a SAR or not. Usually the investigation piece really kind of starts off in the alert area, or something, maybe a teller or somebody has reported something in to you that says, hey, I saw somebody do something in the branch that I didn't, or they said something in the branch that made me uncomfortable. Maybe they went to structure and then decided they didn't want to CTR, went to pull that cash out, didn't want to have a CTR thought on them, change their amount, those kind of things. That's usually where, you're initially alerted. That doesn't necessarily mean that, something is really truly wrong or reportable at that point. But, those are when you kick off that initial kind of standard, routine of investigation cases. The really unique scenarios you get into in this space really wraps around when you receive national security letters or subpoenas or something along those lines that raises a red flag that says, okay, national security letters obviously are received. When they were received, they receive full attention by your staffing, or they should, by your BSA staff. It's a very critical component of the law enforcement, aiding them in what they're trying to figure out might be going on with somebody that they are investigating. That's a different type of process potentially, because it's all hands on deck in your department probably, and you are going to dig a little bit deeper and push to really kind of go beyond what your normal scope of reviewing would normally be. Subpoenas, you're probably looking at folks just because somebody has thought that they may want to know something that's going on at your institution. Maybe you did miss something, maybe didn't trigger an alert, something like that. So there really are kind of two special kind of case scenarios that you run into that take a special skill set to kind of be able to understand and dig into really finding the why behind what triggered initially, and then what you should be looking for while you are investigating. Anything, Nina?
Nope, that pretty much covers it. I like to call this area the who and the what area. This is like the first part of understanding what you're going to be investigating.
When we get into the understanding more of kind of where this alert came from, a lot of times we're looking at, there's a mix of you guys here. So some of you are manual in effort, some of you are software driven, some of you are a combination of both. I will say that I oftentimes see more of a combination of both, because none of BSA and AML should be completely 100% automated, right? We've got to have, cheeks in the seats and eyes on the screen to say, there has to be some human intervention here to understand with logically whether or not something truly does make sense. So really, to get to that case as an investigation process, you've got to understand, if you are using software, is it tuned correctly to help you really be able to dive into understanding the risks of potential money laundering or fraud at your institution based on the products and services and customer base that you offer. A generic package of out-of-the-box alerts with set parameters that you can't change probably isn't diving deep enough to help you really get into understanding that you are really combing for risks to your institution. I can't stress enough that the get what you get and don't pitch a fit that comes from other software providers is unacceptable in this land. There are every institution in the United States is its own snowflake. We don't offer the same products and services. We don't have the same staffing with the same skill sets. We don't have the same demographics in every area. So we've got to really understand the risks in our territory and the risks of the products and services, so that we can then take that at a high level and drill down to say, okay, are my alert parameters set and my rules that I have, are they really tuned? Are the reports that I'm getting, are they really tuned to really think through the risks that may be this entire customer or the entire geographical risk of this area presents to my institution? Anything to add on that part, Nina?
I couldn't have said it any better, Kristin. You pretty much covered it all there.
So the regulatory requirement piece is, we don't really have a choice. We have to be able to detect and report suspicious activity. There is no one way to slice that cake. There's no one recipe to it. And that's because every institution's its own snowflake. And if you've even read an inch of this, this is the last one they printed. It's from 2004. It's the BSA FFIEC manual. It's what examiners really are guided on, and the parts that have updated since then. I stick papers in here. But I think it's important to understand that this particular guide here doesn't tell you how to do something. It tells you things you should look out for. It tells you certain criteria that you have to adhere to, but it doesn't tell you how to achieve that. And that makes it really difficult for institutions, especially in the space that we're in today, where we are running into a situation where a lot of BSA officers are retiring. I don't know of many rising BSA officers or people in college these days that say, oh yeah, I want to go be a BSA officer, or do these certain things. My kids who are teenagers think that what I do is super uncool. I think it's the coolest because you're catching the bad guys, right? But it's the point that when we have these young professionals coming in, or people who may have, chosen to get in this area later in their career, they don't have the roadmap really to tell them how to be able to properly, understand their obligations and how to properly achieve the ability to detect and report suspicious activity effectively. So with that said, you've really got to be able to seek out, other professional, other organizations, other places that are kind of a safe place for you to kind of help you think through, okay, there are probably other peers that are, every institution's its own snowflake, but there are probably other peers in your area that are, if they're demographically in your area, you can kind of, peer-to-peer share the information about not necessarily what's going on at your institution, but the risks your guys are seeing overall, so that you're getting that better drill down as to what's happening in your area, and really working off of each other and those other subject matter experts to kind of help you dial in your program better from that perspective. Anything to add, Nina?
No, only thing I was you made a good point about reaching out to others that are in your area to just kind of discuss like what risk other institutions are seeing, because what I found when I had my cheeks in those seats is that a lot of institutions were dealing with the same issues that we were dealing with. So I think that that's really important information for us to just say, like, sharing is caring. I like that, in a safe space, obviously.
Yeah.
Now, before we move on here, I not a question that came in, but just an acknowledgement. Kristin, we got some love for you having a printed version of some of the regulations. So I'm glad we're saving trees by them not doing that anymore, but definitely appreciate it. Thank you for that.
All right, let's talk about the most fun part. I love writing SARs and I love investigating things. What I will say is, we as BSA professionals are all guilty at some point in our career of digging too far down a rabbit hole and thinking everybody's suspicious. I think everybody's being human trafficked all the time. Like I have that high suspicion, right? It's just a subject that is fascinating me in the aspect of, like, it's very hard for institutions to detect and report human trafficking. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. But it's Nina, you know it too. We're all guilty of just going too far down that rabbit hole. So there's a balance by understanding that not everything you see that comes through your alert system or your reports is necessarily suspicious. Just because it triggered an alert doesn't mean there's actually something wrong necessarily. There's a much bigger story usually surrounding why that alert triggered. It's important in this area to also not blanket statement risk to everybody. So if you have certain higher risk type customers that you're serving or members that you're serving, not all of them are presenting the same type of risk. So if you serve money service businesses, and ATMs or cannabis or hemp, not everybody in that category presents the same type of risk. So you've got to be able to kind of drill down to say, okay, just because they fall into these certain characteristics or territories doesn't mean that, you know, Tolliver's Hemp Company is the same risk because it's a mom and pop shop as the Mac Daddy Nina's hemp shop that, you know, distributes all over the United States. Two very different risks. So it's important to really understand and drill down, okay, first, why this alert triggered? Let me understand who this customer is first, this customer or this member. Let's dig around in their background quickly first by understanding what we've already looked at. If ever have we looked at this customer? Because a lot of time is wasted on alerts when folks don't go and initially say, okay, let me go back in time and say, what has triggered here first? Before this alert triggered, were there ever previous alerts? Were there ever previous cases? Were there ever previous SARS? Because a lot of times, if your folks are doing it right and they're documenting, because we know in our world, if it's not documented, it didn't happen. If they are doing their job correctly, they are telling the who, what, when, where, and why of this alert in their narrative. So you can spend a lot of time, you know, going down rabbit holes that somebody already has gone down before. So it's really, really important to spend the time to kind of, you know, quickly glance at previous alert narratives, cases, SARS, because that's going to tell you a story already that some people have already investigated. Now, you go into your alert, you see your alert, or you go into your report and you see your report, and that's when you're going to really kind of say, okay, if you're in the right software, you're not having to decode why an alert triggered. You're there to quickly understand why an alert triggered, get the supporting information of those transactions, and then kind of expand on that and look around to say, okay, this is why this triggered, but what happened potentially before and potentially after that will help aid me in understanding, is it logical that this happened? Because a lot of times, you know, if you're in a cash intensive area or you're in an elder population area, you may have unique transactions at certain times of the year that maybe they don't do all the time, but doesn't mean what they're doing is suspicious. You know, like for instance, where I'm at, it's a high elder population. There is at the end of the year a time when they write everybody and their brother a check, you know, for tax purposes, right? For their whole family gets a big fat check. That's not something they do every day, but it is something they do once a year, and we have that pattern of behavior, so we can understand that we've investigated that this is truly their family. This is, you know, their pattern of behavior, and what funded that those transactions have been on deposit for decades here, you know, for that purpose. Understanding too and digging into that KYC, KYB part, so really knowing your customer. Did their information change? Has their business operations changed? It's important when you're investigating a business, when's the last time their information was updated? Because if you're looking to understand their business operations and they opened their account 5, 2, 1 year ago even, how do you know that the activity in the account's commensurate with the stated nature of the business as it is today, not when it was at account opening? Because that's probably changed if it's been a significant amount of years between, and you're not really being able to do a thorough investigation if you don't know your customer or your member past what's something they opened an account 20 years ago. Nina brought up a good point about, you know, really reaching out to the front line. You know, what do they have to add to the story? A lot of these times, if they have maybe an assigned relationship manager, maybe they frequent a branch, once a customer is your customer in a branch, because I've worked in the branch space before, boy, oh boy, they'll tell you anything. As soon as they know you have their money, they'll tell you anything. So, you know, reach out, use your front line, help them kind of help tell the story beyond what you may know, because they get really comfortable and a lot of times they spill their own beans and maybe they don't even know they're in a situation that's nefarious. Maybe they do, but they are certainly blabbering most of the time to somebody in your institution about what's going on. And, you know, Nina, I think, you know, you and I have been in this space a long time doing our investigations and cases and whatnot. Any tips to add in kind of understanding about gathering the evidence stuff that you did that helped?
Yeah, so a couple of important things that have helped me along the way. The 4 Ws, the who, what, when, where, and then asking yourself after you get the 4 Ws of who, what, when, where, asking yourself, am I a defensive filer, right? And then also, a teller, Kristin, is like, I love the piece about engaging your frontline staff and your tellers because they're really our first line of defense. So I think it's important to make sure that we are tapping into the frontline staff because they're going to know things that we may or may not know. So utilize them.
All right, myths in this space. Boy, I heard a myth yesterday when I was at PT by somebody, my physical therapist was telling me a myth about, I'm like, you're a physical therapist. Yeah, you know this stuff. Everybody's got their own ideas about investigations and SARs and banking and this and that and the other. One myth I hear all the time is when you've opened a case, now you have to file a SAR. And Nina said the perfect word, they're a defensive filer. There are, and I've been there, you've been there, people who are listening have been there. We've been there because sometimes it's easier to explain why you filed a SAR than it is not to file a SAR. A lot of times your examiners and your auditors are more picky about your no SAR filings than they are your SAR filings. When you open a case up, that doesn't mean you have to file a SAR. That means you are completing your investigation and documenting whether or not you need to file a SAR or not file a SAR, and then you go file a SAR if that's appropriate. You don't have to file a SAR on everybody you open a case for. There are institutions that do that, but a lot of times I will tell you the institutions that are known defensive filers have gotten in trouble for that, for clogging up the system. So just know that your case is there to help you document why you chose to not file a SAR or file a SAR. Don't be scared of opening cases. Open cases whenever you're doing any more than just an alert narrative. If you have to take, a good rule of thumb is if you have to take more than 10 minutes to investigate an alert, you should probably be escalating that into a case because a false positive is going to quickly stick out like a sore thumb, an easy false positive. Anything that's taking you more than 10 minutes is because your wheels are starting to turn. That should raise a red flag for you. Open a case, investigate, and close it out if you just happen to be sniffing down a rabbit hole that day further than you should have, or maybe it is suspicious enough, but it doesn't warrant an actual SAR yet, but it's on the radar because it doesn't fall into the SAR filing guidelines. So it's better to open in a case and document your thought process there because again, if it's not documented, it didn't happen. You have to file a SAR within 30 days of account opening or of opening a case. That's also not true. Now, if your policy states that that's what you file a SAR within 30 days of opening a case, then yeah, you should because your policy says it. And also I would consider rewriting your policy because that's a little bit too much of pinning yourself in a corner. You can talk to me afterwards. If you don't have that written in your policy, you don't have to file a SAR within 30 days of opening a case. A case is where you start your detailed investigation. Should you have a kind of internal time limit of how long you'll let a case be open before you actually mark it, determine whether it's something is suspicious or not? Yeah, that's a best practice for certain. But just because you on July 1st, you open a case doesn't mean on July 31st, you have to file that SAR. It's when you determine the activity is suspicious. That starts your 30-day time clock. That's when you need to file your SAR. After the date that you determined it's suspicious is when your clock starts. And lastly, the myth is you have to file reoccurring SARs for any suspicious activity. So let me explain this a little bit. If you have filed a SAR on suspicious activity, and it's based off of elder financial abuse, and you filed your SAR and it's time for your 90-day SAR review, When it comes to your 90-day SAR review, you know there's no more elder exploitation happening here, but now it's structuring and some other events happening, but nothing to do with elder exploitation. You don't have to file a reoccurring SAR. You don't file a reoccurring SAR on that. You close that case because it's new suspicious activity that you're worried about now, not the elder exploitation. And that cumulative amount, is different for the elder exploitation that happened. It's going to be different subjects, different SARs, boxes checked in your SARs, different narrative, the whole 9 yards. This is something that I have talked at length with regulators about, and they're not going to necessarily ding you for filing reoccurring SARs for changing activity, but the best practice and what law enforcement wants you to do is to stop that filing and refiling and start a whole new sequence of filing. Nina, anything to add there?
I just wanted to say, you made a good point, and I just want to remind us all, a case today doesn't necessarily have to be a SAR today, but a case today can be a SAR later on down the line. So it's best, I like to say a case is like where you show your work, and you may deem that case, like once you show your work, you're in there working on the case today, it may not be a SAR today, but further on down the line as activity and behavior continues to happen, you may need to then further on down the line do a SAR. So a case is just a place where you can gather all your findings, look at it, evaluate it, and you can always come back to the case. So I think that's really important to remember, Kristin. That's all I was going to say there.
Agreed. All right. Oh man, there are some obstacles in our world, isn't there, Nina? I'm telling you, a number of alerts, I have walked into some institutions that have just backlogged thousands of alerts because they don't have the staffing to adhere to it. The high volume of alerts, the more alerts does not mean the better. The less alerts doesn't necessarily mean the better. The more accurate alerts, obviously, is better. That's hard to achieve in a lot of software out there today. It's also hard to justify parameter changes sometimes. If you're given, if you've partnered with a software vendor and they've said, here's your parameters, also you can't really adjust them, or you can, but here's how you do it, and there's no advice as to why they should or should not. People changing parameters for alert on their alert monitoring systems without justification get in trouble. If you haven't been in trouble yet and you're doing it and you haven't documented your why, you're going to get in trouble. So go back in time and document what your why, okay? It's very, very, very important to understand that you're not just trying to lessen alerts so that you can get other work done. You are changing your parameters in a way that is there and documented logically to say, okay, maybe my elder exploitation alert parameters should not be for anybody who's under 55 years old, because that's not an elder anyway. But maybe it should be 78 years old because I live in a population where there are a lot of elders here. And so like those kind of thinking through demographics and understanding your demographics and understanding how many false negatives or false positives that you've had, all of that jazz will help you better be able to make more risk-based, informed decisions on changing your parameters so that the volume, maybe it's not necessarily significantly lessens, but what's coming through there is actually more meaningful. And when you have meaningful alerts, you deal less with complacency issues. When you have a high volume of false positive alerts, it don't matter who you are. You could be, Inspector Gadget or Harriet Spine, be really, really good at and really interested in investigating these certain things, but after a while you're going to get bored with it because nothing fruitful is coming from it. And then you automatically think, oh, well, this is just going to be a false positive anyway, so I'm just going to rush through it. And then that's how you miss really critical things to your institution. Staffing is also an issue from that perspective. If we don't have, again, we have the issue of we're having a lot of BSA staffing retire. A lot of times that one person doing that job now takes 2 or 3 people to do that job, but they're not as familiar with the job yet because either they've only done it for a little bit out of maybe in another institution, or maybe they've never done it before. Maybe they're the teller that drew the short straw. A lot of training issues in this area. Limited staffing. A lot of times the BSA officer is also the CRA officer, also the security officer, wearing many, many hats. So they don't have a lot of time to spend in this area. So the lack of training, the new staffing, just the lack of availability of people to help in this space can also be a huge issue. When we look at other common obstacles, gathering the data. Okay, we said earlier, well, talk to your teller, do that, okay, that takes time. It takes time, and it's not like you have a lot of time necessarily all the time. So it'd be really beneficial to have a one-stop shop where you have the ability to access and request information from certain parties to say, okay, hey, can you look at this alert and let me know if you have any other information that could help me in my investigation? And that can be to the front line, that can be, something that's streamlined through the right technology to say, hey, I'm going to assign this alert to you, Nina, and, can you look at it and give me any notes that you may have around here? Doesn't mean they have to decision it. Doesn't mean that they need to know what happens afterwards, because they can't. But it means that they've been able to aid you in your investigation appropriately. A lot of times there's issues with software not having all the relevant transactions. Maybe you are only getting fed a certain data feed in, and some of your activity in other products is happening over here siloed in this part of the, or a middleware instead of coming directly through the core. There's all sorts of issues that, could be, from a model validation perspective, not giving you all the information that you need to be able to make pertinent and, risk-based informed decisions. We also tend to run into the issue of, okay, ooh, we found something, I'm going to report it, and then it goes into, we feel like a black hole. Well, yeah, that's not lost on me. I've filed 1 million SARs in my lifetime, and it wasn't until maybe halfway through my career that I was like, that's it, I'm tired of things going in a black hole, I'm thinking of this differently now. And then went and tried to engage with every law enforcement agency out there, so I had a direct connect. So if I thought something was truly juicy and suspicious enough, like human trafficking, terrorist financing, all these certain really public safety issue problems, then I had the right connection, or I wasn't always calling them for every SAR I filed, but I was at least getting some traction, and they knew, oh, if Kristin's calling me, she's got a juicy SAR. I file my SAR, I pick up law enforcement, and I say, hey, Maria, I at the FBI, I've just filed this SAR, I've got potential human trafficking issues over here. And you wouldn't believe, even if you're at a teeny tiny institution, that's where the bad actors tend to target, because they don't think you're trained enough, they don't think you have the technology, they don't think you have the right staffing to be able to detect it. So if you think there's little or nothing happening at your institution because you're under a couple $2 billion, I would bet money that you that's false hope you're having there, unfortunately. Nina?
I just wanted to, the last bullet point here, write a catchy SAR. That's my favorite, because I think I experienced that firsthand when I was a BSA officer, and just giving, when you're writing a SAR, try your best to consolidate all of that good, juicy information, even if it's already in the SAR report. Good rule of thumb is to just maybe like consolidate all of that, so whatever law enforcement is reading your narrative has everything in one location. They don't have to flip through the pages. Make sure everything's there for them to read and digest. That's important.
Absolutely. There's a really good webinar we did earlier this year called SAR Wars, Law Enforcement Awakened. And it goes through the whole life cycle of a SAR once it gets to law enforcement and best practices around there. It's really, really, first of all, it's super entertaining. Second of all, it's very informative. And I think we even have, and Ethan can correct me if I'm wrong, I think we even have a download on our website available for writing a good, effective SAR. I had a very, very high SAR response rate, and it was you know, a lot of times because I did have those connections with law enforcement, a lot of times it was because we knew how to write the juiciest stuff up front that would get people's attention. So it's always about being clear and concise, but also keeping these really, really succinct keywords up top that, you know, are being scanned for so that they're bubbling up to the top, you know. So you don't want to say all this juicy stuff if it's not, if they're just structuring and it's something that's, you know, they did it once and whatever, you know, it's like make my job harder, people. That was too easy. But you want to be able to really make clear, concise, and effective SAR narratives. There's that good guide on our website for that component too, that will actually give you good examples of how to actually write that narrative out. You know, there's complexity of cases. There's a lot of times we don't have the right technology or tool in our pocket to follow the money here, there, and everywhere, right? Maybe it's coming in our account, and maybe it's being convoluted in our own institution because it's being distributed here, there, and everywhere, and then it's being distributed out everywhere. It's kind of hard to follow the money. Maybe sometimes it also involves lending, and it also involves this and that we're not kind of privy because we're kind of siloed and we don't have, you know, as much information from lending departments because maybe that information doesn't feed into the core to feed into the BSA system, right? You know, it can be really, really convoluted from that. That feeds into the technology limitations too. If your information that comes out of your software and alerts you to something suspicious, same thing goes for manual reports. It's only as good as the data that's being fed into it. If it's garbage in, then it's just garbage out and it's wasting your time. So be cognizant that you really understand the data that's being fed in there to, even if it's a manual report, validate it. Try to have some type of model validation that you can understand that what's coming in is actually legitimate, and you know, so that what's coming out is something that could be pertinent that you should look at and not just a waste of your time.
Well said. I believe that brings us to our next poll question, which should be popping up on your screen now. And that's just to take a quick pulse check of which of these challenges that we just discussed resonate with you the most. So that is, you can select as many or as few as you would like. As a reminder, those responses are volume of alerts, resource constraints, gathering data, getting the attention of law enforcement, and then we combine together complex cases and technology limitations just for the sake of saving some space there. So we'll give you all just a couple more seconds to get your responses in. Again, choose as many or as few of these challenges as you see fit. All righty, excellent. Thank you all for being quick on the draw there. As we are showing these responses, we can see that most of the people on the call self-identify as having a challenge with the volume of alerts. 56% of our audience today, followed not too far behind by 44% that say gathering that data is a big challenge for them. Our next three responses are pretty even. A third of our audience is struggling with some resource constraints. 28% has a tough time getting the attention of law enforcement. 28% struggling with complex cases and technology limitations. Nina, let me ask you, I know as our client success manager, you're working with a lot of customers. How does this stack up to what you tend to find on your customer calls? Are they dealing with these same kind of challenges?
Absolutely, Ethan. These are pretty standard, unfortunately. So yeah, I think can you go back to the poll for me? Let me look at those figures again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Volume of alerts. Yeah, that even when I had my cheeks in the seats, that would have been my number one poll. And I think that sometimes it's risky because what that actually says is you may or may not be looking at something that could potentially be a case. So these are definitely areas of concern.
Excellent. Thank you all so much for participating there. I think it's time for us to jump into some real life examples here.
Yeah, this is where the juicy stuff happens here.
I love this stuff.
Breaking Bad's a great example. You know, it's hard for us to go with really real life examples considering, you know, your lips are sealed, and what do we all say? We don't look good in orange for telling the juicy secrets of our institutions. the Breaking Bad example is pretty blatant, right? There, if you've seen the show, or if you haven't seen the show, you know, it's all about, oh, it's about a lot of things, but laundering money is really the main thing, right? And when Skylar, the wife of Walter, finds out, you know, the whole event of him in a whole meth lab situation they're in, and then all the drug lords and, you know, whatnot here, there, and everywhere. She Googles how to launder money, and I almost lost my mind because it's like, well, this over. If anybody's doing their job right, they, you know, like that's, you don't do that. You don't do that. That's not something we can tell as BSA officers that that's happening, but like, you definitely don't Google how to launder money when you're trying to figure out how to launder money. The unexplained business revenue, they had a car wash and they tried to make their best, they bought a car wash to try to launder and wash the money through, right? But they ended up with so much cash that they ended up having to rent a storage unit and pile those stacks of cash in there because it was becoming a little bit blatant when that a car wash would not make as many the stacks you're seeing there. But the fact that the car wash was even as cash intensive as it was should raise a red flag in any manual or alert monitoring system. So it's a good example to say, always be looking out for the fact that if something in the business, if something does not appear commensurate with the stated nature of the business, it should always be investigated. A car wash making, you know, depositing hundreds of thousands a week, I don't think so. I don't think that's legit.
Okay, Ozark. This one is my favorite. You guys, I got stuck watching this one during the pandemic, and I mean, it just blew my mind. So Ozark, they have an episode where they literally walk you through how to launder money. Like, it's crazy. So Marty, who's the husband, basically needed a way to wash his funds. So he created a few different types of businesses. He had a riverboat casino, there was a motel at one point, and there was a strip club at another point. And basically what he was doing, he was starting the legitimate businesses and mixing the legitimate funds with the dirty funds, and then depositing those funds into a foreign checking account that he was able to access via like ATM, and that's how he was able to like launder and use those funds again. And this one particular episode 4, just floored me because he gave step by step. And this family in Ozark, they even had their little son who ended up laundering money. It's just, it was wild. But yeah, I think that the episode was called Money Laundering 101. Just crazy.
I like to say that if the bank in episode 1 had done their job correctly, the rest of Ozark would have never happened.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like when I watched the first episode, I'm like, who is in the risk department?
All right. So I mentioned human trafficking earlier. I worked at an institution where we educated our staffing on things to look for that were human trafficking red flags. This could be a whole nother webinar on, you know, teaching you guys how to kind of dig deeper and understand that. Detecting human trafficking through the means of traditional BSA AML transaction monitoring is tough because a lot of times human trafficking is low dollar volume, but low dollar volume transactions, but high aggregate totals. But the low volume dollar amounts makes it hard because setting your rule parameters thresholds at a dollar amount that's low just going to blow your alert volume through the roof, and you're going to have tons of false positives. So we spent the time really kind of educating our staff on, okay, every alert that you're going to look at, it doesn't matter what it triggered for. You're going to look for these 4 or 5 things that would be indicative of human trafficking. That could be they are buying an absorbent amount of fast food beyond what 1 or 2 people could consume. And they're doing that multiple times a day. Maybe they're having multiple times a day DoorDash. I'm talking more than 3 people. I know there are people that DoorDash every meal, but high volume, those that, interestingly enough, still to this day rent a lot of Redbox movies, right? They have to keep the people entertained that they're obtaining. Maybe there are situations where you're seeing areas where there are high volume in of deposits, but you're never seeing really any payroll out. That doesn't mean, could mean they have their payroll of some other institution, but if majority of their activity is happening here and the only thing that's missing is payroll, that's a red flag. So every time they looked at an alert, they were tasked with just take a quick glance. You don't have to spend a lot of time, just take a quick glance and do the last 60 days. Look, guys, the amount of human trafficking that was found was really mind-blowing. And this is where we had to collaborate with law enforcement a lot, because maybe the SAR volume wasn't, the dollar amount wasn't something that the FBI would even ever look at, because if it's below $1 million or this, that, and the other, sometimes it's not looked at, unfortunately, for some territories. So you really got to have that collaboration with law enforcement. I think it's really important to remind your folks that how critical and their job is to really protecting their own communities, protecting not just their financial institution against regulatory scrutiny, but protecting their next door neighbor, protecting their own grandparents against elder abuse, these million different things. And sometimes your alert transaction monitoring system just doesn't physically have the ability to do that. So I think it's important for you guys to take the time to educate your staffing, even yourselves, on these things that we can look through between the cracks of where we think we're initially investigating because it triggered an alert, and just happen to take a quick glance every time, because you will find the juice is worth the squeeze.
Kristin, I just wanted to piggyback on that one as well, and just say, I think that that's another area that you could reach out to other FIs in your area, just to see if they've noticed certain trends. Because what I found, if it's going on in my neighborhood, it's a strong possibility that the same thing could be going on at the credit union right next door. So that's definitely an area where sharing is caring.
Yeah, absolutely. So some kind of key takeaways from the day are really, you guys are the heroes of the room. Regulatory adherence is key. Again, nobody you guys are personally liable. If you're a BSA officer, you're personally liable for making sure your program is adhering to regulatory requirements, and it's nothing slipping through the cracks. The chances of you winding up in jail are probably slim, but it's important that you really then take that accountability and hold other people accountable, because it's the board that's ultimately responsible for your program. So keeping everybody educated, keeping everybody in the loop is important. And at the end of the day, it's all about really, do I have the right ways in place, the right processes, the right procedures that people feel comfortable? If it didn't trigger in my alert monitoring system, do they have ways to report to me that something might be suspicious outside of what I might see from a day-to-day basis out of a software? Understanding that case management is cyclical in nature is important, right? It's not just a one and done deal. You may have cases that are ongoing forever because you're watching them. Maybe they never really they never really trigger that SAR filing moment, but there's just something that doesn't smell right there, right? Use that as your tracking mechanism. Leverage right technologies. There are good technologies out there. RiskOut's one of them. We help people with their case management, their investigation process all the time. We help you document your no SAR and SAR filings, or we help you keep artifacts of everything that you need to really kind of help you from an audit and a trail. It's about being able to defend yourself and the decisions you made. That's what it comes down to. And it's not defending yourself just against regulators and auditors. It's against your own management, your own staffing to say, why did I choose to do this? And that's the best way to do that is in a case and investigation.
That brings us to our next poll question as we kind of pivot into our next slide here. That should be coming up on your screen, and that asks, how often do you give or receive training around BSA cases and investigations? That's anywhere from monthly to annually, maybe even less frequently than that, or possibly never. You know, we've all been there. Lack of staffing is something we've already covered today, so we understand. We'll give y'all just a couple seconds here and we'll share out those results. It looks like about 46% of our audience is doing that training annually. So once a year, just shy of a third are doing it 4 times a year, quarterly, only 8% doing it monthly, 15% doing it less frequently than once a year, and fortunate that none of our people are going untrained. So that's good to hear here, Kristin. I think that pivots us into your next slide on continuous improvement. I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, I think it's key to stay abreast of what's going on in your own territories. Know who's in your backyard. If you don't want to serve a certain customer type or member type, that's fine. But don't pretend that they're not in your backyard. You know, you've got to understand the risks of even who you don't want to bank and how potentially they may come in, you know, either wittingly under the guise of someone else or unwittingly because the front line wasn't trained enough to turn them away. You know, you've got to understand really, truly those, you know, geographical risks, you know, partnering and understanding what's going on in your own community, then understanding what's going on at the, you know, what are the regulators seeing? Engage with your regulators, help them help you. It's their job. They're not there just to kind of judge you. I mean, in a way they are, but you know, throughout they a lot of them take this job because they want to ensure the safety and soundness of your institution. And you know, the more engaged you are with them, I can tell you they are so much happier when they come into your exam because they feel like they know what's going on at your institution. So engage your regulators, say, okay, I know we're just one bank or credit union in this area, but what are you seeing, you know, in this area too that maybe you think I should be aware of, you know, from that education standpoint. And then, you know, customer communication is key. If you're banking folks that you are more high touch, that you need to be able to get in touch with to understand certain activities, maybe they're higher risk, maybe they're money service business, maybe ATM, maybe cannabis, setting expectations from the very beginning that you will be reaching out for information and that your expectations are they provide that information back. Setting those expectations with the customers makes a much more fruitful and fruit-bearing long relationship that, you know, there's not tensions in there, right? You're able to, you know, and when they don't adhere to what you said and they agree to, then, you know, trigger your exit plan. There's too many good customers out there to be banking the bad ones.
Excellent. Well said. Thank you for those key wrap-up points. Now, as we transition into our last couple minutes for Q&A, we do have one final poll question that we'd love for y'all to answer. That should pop up on your screen now. And this is just asking if you would be interested in speaking with us here at Risk Out about any of the following. We've got great experts like Kristin, like Nina, like the rest of our team, former regulators in the works that would love to help you out. So if any of these meet your needs, or if there's just anything else that you'd like to chat with us about, please let us know in this poll question. We greatly, greatly appreciate it. And we'll spend our last little bit of time here dropping into Q&A. I know our time is limited, so if you have a question and you just haven't gotten the chance to ask it, you can always follow up with us on the website, but feel free to drop those in the questions section of that GoToWebinar panel. We did have one question, Kristin, that I'll ask to you if you don't mind. That actually touches on 314B. I know we talked a little bit about information sharing. The question says, how does 314B come into play when I'm looking for evidence from other banks? Can y'all share some experience that you have on this front?
Man, I wish I had really positive things to say about 314B, but it's really luck of the institution who wants to respond to you. You're going to find at the larger institutions, some of them have dedicated teams to just answering 314B, and some of them will let it go into a black hole and you'll never hear from them again. Some of institutions participate in 314B because they, with their heart believe in it, but don't have the staffing to actually respond to you. 314B is there to help you ask questions maybe related to money laundering, not any other subject. So remember that too. It's, if it's not money laundering related, you can't ask that other institution, Anything to add, Nina?
Nope, I was just gonna say, make sure it's about money laundering, but you covered that one.
Yeah, I've gotten some great information from some institutions. Other times I get, no answer, and it's an unfortunate, it's not not everybody has to participate in 314B. It's voluntary. So don't make it your, don't sit on a case forever waiting because you're trying to get a little bit more supporting information from another bank that that they're, or credit union, that they've been transacting with, because set yourself, for a best practice, set yourself a time limit on what you're willing to wait for a response. And after a certain amount of time, you're just going to have to close the door and make your case decision for a no SAR or SAR filing.
Excellent. Well, thank you all so much for that response, and thank you to our audience for sending some of those questions in. That is all of the time that we have for today. We thank you so much for joining us, and a big thank you to both Kristin and Nina for sharing their expertise with us. Please keep an eye on your inbox, as we will be sending out the recording, slides, and resources from today's session out in a follow-up email later this week. There will also be a brief survey following today's webinar where you can give us a little bit of feedback, a little bit of input on what times you prefer these webinars to be at, so we can best fit into your schedule. If you do have any additional questions that we just weren't able to get to, if you want to learn a little bit more about Risk Out, or if you just want to say hi to myself, Kristin, or Nina, be sure to come visit us at riskout.com. We hope to see you on your next webinar. Thank you so much. Have a great day, y'all.